Okay, it's 4:30. I'm going to call this meeting of the Kerrville Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Dorothy, would you mind taking roll, please?
Yes, sir. Bob Waller, Garrett Harmon,
Here.
David Jones,
Here.
Michael Siegerman,
Here.
Rustin Zuber,
Here.
Bill Morgan,
Here.
Tricia Byram. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dorothy. Item number 1 is our Visitor Citizens Forum. Any person with business not scheduled on the agenda is encouraged to briefly speak to the commission. Please fill out the speaker request form and give it to the commission secretary prior to the meeting. The number of speakers will be limited to the first 10 speakers, and each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. No formal action can be taken on these items, as the Open Meetings Act requires formal action items to be posted on an agenda no later than 72 hours before the meeting. If formal action is required, the items will be placed on an agenda for a future meeting. Does anyone have any business that's not on the agenda? Okay. Item 2 is a consent agenda. All items listed below on the consent agenda are considered routine or ministerial in nature and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the items will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. We're going to go ahead and table item 2A on the minutes, and we will review those at a later date. Okay, item 3, public hearing, consideration, and action. Item 3A is consideration, public hearing, and action on a text amendment. Public hearing, to an amendment to the city's zoning code by amending Article 13I3, definitions, interpretations of words and phrases, and Articles 11-1-4 through 11-1-11 to amend land use tables for multiple zoning districts to add parking structure and parking lot standalone as permitted by right or as a conditional use within each referenced district. All right, Drew, you want to give us a little background on this?
Yes, sir. This came before the Planning Commission a few months ago to look at amending the zoning code to add parking lots as a listed land use, whether conditional or permitted, in each of our zoning districts. We had one public hearing, then we tabled that decision to a workshop in May. Had a workshop with the commission and staff. And I believe Mr. Motherall was present for that workshop as well. We looked at each district and the purpose statement of those districts. The commission gave some direction to staff as far as where to put the parking lot as a standalone use and or parking structure, full parking garage, in the zoning code, whether they should be conditional or permitted based on the intentions of each of those zoning districts. Through that discussion, as far as a parking garage or a parking structure, it was determined that any zoning district where a parking lot was even considered as a standalone, conditional or permitted, that a parking garage needs to be conditional. That needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, no matter what district it's in. With regards to the standalone parking lot, just your surface parking with no primary use, the only 2 districts that were identified would be C16 and E27. Those are both heavy commercial districts. Not a significant impact on any of our creeks and river. Not a significant impact on our entry corridors. As we looked through the remaining districts, the following districts were pulled out as conditional, primarily either as an entrance corridor or the impact that it could have on some of our creeks and the Guadalupe River, whether it be runoff or just the visibility concerns. W1 through 10, all of our west districts, C11 through C15, C17, C19, and C20. The CBD district, which includes the downtown core, N21 through 38, E25, 26, and 28 through 32, S33 through 37, R3, which is a multifamily residential district, and RT is what the draft before you has. The following districts were recommended to not allow parking as a standalone use: R1, R1A, RC, and RN. Through that workshop, as I mentioned, the commission looked at each purpose statement of every district and felt that the RT district in particular needed more discussion. Definitely wanted to have the public input on that. Through the finishing of our comprehensive plan, that draft document, and looking at the direction that the community has expressed for existing neighborhoods and the reinvestment in our existing city limits. The description of the residential transition district and what that means to the community, staff is recommending that district be pulled out, that it not be allowed as a standalone use for parking lots in the RT district. Based on that, recommend the draft for your consideration. Again, the recommendation is to take RT out, but the rest of those districts to remain as conditional or permitted as we've discussed through the workshop. Any
All right.
questions?
Any questions, commissioners?
And I'd be pleased to answer any questions after the public hearing too, if there are any.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Drew,
Yes.
the reason for the staff's recommendation to take RT out, what was y'all's reasoning?
With the comprehensive plan draft being finalized, there was a significant input from the community to reinvest in our existing neighborhoods. That the existing neighborhoods are an important piece to both our housing and our community character. That moving those parking lots into those neighborhoods could be considered a detriment. Additionally, with the purpose of the RT district is to maintain, the word I've used before is maintain that buffer between the commercial area and your traditional neighborhoods. That transition district being placed between those two does allow for some small non-residential uses, but each of those are geared towards a residential style and feel. Now, your office buildings are going to look like a home with the parking back behind the home and screened from, the street view, so that it still maintains that residential character. And that just a standalone parking lot with no structure does not meet that residential character.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at 4:38, going to open the public hearing. I do have several speaker request forms, so in no particular order. Mr. Motherall?
I'll go later, if it's okay.
Okay. Don Barnett?
Hi, gentlemen. Used to sit over with you guys, and sorry I left in such an abrupt hurry, but
You bailed.
yeah, I had to resign. That's how it works, when you go somewhere else. So
And this seat's really uncomfortable.
we'll adjust it. I just adjust it. Good to see you back, Bill.
Yep,
back. As you know, when I sat on planning and zoning, we had a lot of conversation about residential transition, and I know you guys have put a lot of time and effort into that. And I think the comprehensive plan is a great document in terms of giving us an overall direction for what we should be trying to do with this city. However, I think planning and zoning is that place where you have to make those one-on-one decisions as you look at each particular appeal that comes through here. Because without that appeal, without someone being able to have some rights, and they have property rights, obviously, to do things with their property, but without the opportunity for the board to look at it on a one-by-one basis, you're limiting yourself. So I recommend that you don't follow the staff recommendation, that you leave it as a conditional use recommendation, because you need to look at each one's request and make that judgment as to how it's going to impact that particular area. And that's where the controversy is going to be, because if you are locked in by the comprehensive plan, then there's going to be some areas that are going to be blighted or whatever the condition may be that you want to kind of move forward on. And there's a lot of exceptions already in this city, but I think that we have to look at it as a case-by-case basis. That's my recommendation.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Don.
you. All right. And Jeanette Watson. Please state your name and address for us.
Jeanette Watson, Cisco Lane, Kerrville, Texas.
Okay.
See you in a different setting. I was asked to read the letter I had drafted to the editor of the paper,
Okay.
and so I would like to take this time to read it. I'm writing this letter in memory of my mother, who lived on Clay Street for many years and enjoyed the peaceful walks in a residential neighborhood every day that the weather and her health permitted. A business on Sidney Baker wants to put a parking lot on Clay Street for its customers. The people on Clay Street have asked, please, that a parking lot not be built in their area. And at the time, the city of Kerrville wisely denied the parking lot request. Yet the business on Sidney Baker continues to push forward, removing the fence, cutting down beautiful old trees, and clearing the lot. I hope this can be resolved to the benefit of both parties concerned. And as a side note, there's a beautiful big parking lot at the end of the block that does not deny anybody from parking there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay. Mary Lee Stewart. Please state your name and address for us.
I am Mary Lee Stewart, and I live at 600 Murda, which is at the top of Clay Street.
Okay.
And we moved into that house in 1940, and it was old then. I appreciate being able to talk to y'all today, and thank you. I object to standalone parking lots or parking structures in a residential transition zone. As I understand, residential transition means a zone that looks as though it's strictly residential, not parking lots or structures, and allows some businesses to operate in these homes. A parking lot is not compatible with the look and the feel of the residential transition purpose and intent. The 700, 800 block of Clay is all one part, and it has 12 houses on the west side of the street. Some are smallish with small lots, and some are not. A couple of them have businesses inside, but most of them are families, and some with children. 14 days ago, I started taking photos of the parking lot at 820 Sidney Baker, mainly during the lunch or dinner hour. These photos show a daily average usage that is below 1/3 of the total capacity of the 56 parking spaces. 1/3 is 18 vehicles and 32% of capacity. The highest usage observed was on June 16th at below 50%. I've sent these photos to all of P&Z. Of great concern to me is the removal of the fence and the curb between 820 Sidney Baker, which is commercial, and 829 Clay, which is residential transition. And that is directly behind the Smoking Dragon restaurant. In addition, the cutting down of several approximately 50 to 75-year-old trees on the 729 Clay Street lots distressing, especially since the 2050 plan provides credit for preserving existing desirable trees. Also, I've noticed vehicles being parked on the back part of 829 Clay Street. I'm sorry I didn't take photos of them when I saw them. It shows intent to use it as a parking lot, opening up the fence and removing the curbing and so on. The results from the 2050 gathering of community leaders highlighted the category that affordable, attainable housing was a high priority at 89% rating. I want to stress that their words were that it's high priority. Here's a quote from the website. Incentivize improvement of older housing stock. More smaller options for seniors besides assisted living, including rentals housing stock that fits income levels of working people. Mixed-use housing downtown or within walking distance of retail and services. I spoke to this group before the January 18th meeting when this issue came up in a rezoning meeting on Clay Street. And I quoted from the P&Z document that pointed out that the purpose of District 21N is to permit the development of small businesses that use the Highway 16 corridor into central city area north of Barnett in a manner which, one, promotes a reasonably attractive entranceway into the central city, but two, does not adversely affect the adjacent residential area. I appreciate your paying attention to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart.
All right. Mr. Motherall, I don't have any other speaker request forms.
Okay. I think that, number one, I appreciate you gentlemen and your time and interest in the effort. The issue seems to be one of misconceived, in a sense, in this particular block of a community situation. The reality is, if you will take and measure along that block of Clay Street, the front footage of the areas where public parking is currently available measure and equal more than 51% of the front footage along that section of Clay. So what we are proposing is not going to change the neighborhood at all. Many of the, I say many, a number of the houses that are there are in sad repair and, quite frankly, ought to be condemned. But I don't want to get into a disagreement with anybody. I have, for several months now, actually since December, this is 7 months, I've been trying to work with the city. The staff at that time, when I first came to them, said that we ought to go for a change the zoning. I said, okay, what does that entail and how do you want to proceed? She said, well, it'd be spot zoning if we just took your property. I said, okay, so what are you saying? Well, we need to get Mr. Ray involved because he has a number of lots in there. And his zoning in adjacent to mine is RT, even though there is a parking lot and commercial buildings on it. I said, okay. So I went to Joe Ray, and talked to him, and he agreed, well, if that's what you want to do, I'll go along and with you. So we did. We made an application. By law, by rule, we are required, or the city is required, to notify people within 200 feet of the property that you're asking for rezoning on. That 200 feet barely made it to Mrs. Stewart's property It barely made it to Mrs. Reeves' property. Had it been my property alone, they would not have been within that 200 feet. And we came to the commission and we were turned down. Okay, that was done. Now, the next step was, and members of the commission, several of them had said that, why not use a conditional use permit? I said, okay. So we went through that process month after month after month, and finally, at this point, have a recommendation to the commission that conditional use be allowed within several zones and should include the RT zone. I am very disappointed in the fact that this has gotten to be such a rancor deal. I certainly don't want to be at odds with anybody or create problems for anybody. I just want to be able to use my property in quiet convenience and be a good part of the city. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Other than that, I don't know what to tell you.
All right.
Bruce, since we first started down this road with you and Mr. Ray on the zoning change, and that was turned down, we haven't heard from him at all. Is he not interested in, if I remember correctly, he already has a parking lot there that
Yes.
that runs all the way to Clay Street?
Yes, it does. He has a parking lot there, and his property is adjacent to mine.
Right. And he has not been back to us, so I'm assuming
No.
he's not interested. He doesn't need anything.
No, that's right.
Have you had any conversation with him about the possibility of using some of his parking, which doesn't seem to be used at all?
No, I have not.
Okay.
The problem with like with the lady's example, people are, as you well know, we all tend to be lazy, and we don't want to walk any further than we have to walk. And so to say that we could use the church parking lot, for example, is just doesn't make any sense.
Well, the church parking lot is further away. I was just curious about
Yeah.
Ray's property. Are your purpose in trying to incorporate additional parking is for employees of the businesses that work there, is that correct?
That's
You're not
correct.
looking for customer parking?
No. No, we have, and I hope everybody in town is supportive of the military. We have the military recruiting office there. When we leased to them, they had 4 men, each had their own personal vehicle. Today, they have 10 with their personal vehicles, plus 10 government vehicles. Totally unanticipated when we started. All I'm trying to do is to work with people.
Okay. All right. We're still in the public hearing. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? Yeah. Please state your name and address.
Bruce Drakey, 615 Earl Garrett. I had a couple of questions. There seem to be some zones that aren't mentioned at all, like the Gateway and the Guadalupe River Zone. And I was wondering why they're not listed at all.
Some of those districts, the commission, through our workshop, had recommended that they not be included at all, whether conditional or permitted, for the standalone parking or a structure.
Then I guess I misunderstood something. Let me go back and look at it. So, but they're not in the list of not recommended to not allow it either.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, so they're just meant not to have parking in those
Right.
areas. Okay. The other thing is I'm very concerned that this seems to be about one property, and what we're really talking about is the residential transition zone around the city. And for example, I have property in the residential transition zone on Earl Garrett, which I love. And one of the things that I don't care for, and it's a grandfathered in parking lot that also belongs to a church, is that's right behind me over several blocks on the street behind me. I want to say Washington off the top of my head. And I don't think that does fit the character of a residential transition. And so I really, all I want to say is you guys tonight are deciding something that is not about one property. And it is, if you look on the map, and I was just looking at it, there's RT all over, and the character of RT is very different in different places. And having a parking lot in the RT definitely changes the residential nature of that neighborhood. And that's part of what I love about that Earl Garrett stretch, and I'm talking about property where I am, and I think there are advantages to that we see on Earl Garrett, and especially on Water Street, West Water, as it heads off past 5 Points and such. And I think there are opportunities for that are a real plus for the city. And so I just wanted to make that point, that we're really not talking tonight about one property. We're talking about all over the city. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Bruce. Mr. Motherall, do you have one other comment?
I don't disagree in a sense with Mr. Strachey, but the issue is to allow a conditional use permit. It is not a blanket permit to go willy-nilly and do it. It has to, with a conditional use permit, come to this commission to be done. And so his statement that we're changing the whole world doesn't really fit. Okay, RT. Anyway, thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak during the public hearing? All right, at 4:57, public hearing is closed. Fellow commissioners, thoughts or questions?
I have a question or a clarification. As I understand it, on a conditional use permit, should the ownership of the property change, the conditional use permit is still there. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That is correct.
And then so the parking lot's there. It's supposed now only for employees, but if changed, it may become parking lot for something else that goes in the place of the restaurant in question.
You can't designate what the parking lot is for.
That's right. And so it can multiply with the number of cars that would be used on a daily basis. So are we opening a can of worms that we really don't want to look at?
That's a valid concern, I think. Yeah. Rustin?
You know, in our workshop, what we did, we went through every zone. I know you weren't there, Bill, but we went through every zone and looked at the intent and description of every single zone. And then we looked for our parking lots compatible with that. And that's when, if you look at the intent of the RT, it's supposed to look like a residential zone. And the parking is supposed to be in the back so you don't see it. And that's where we bumped into that. And the problem was, if you made it conditional, it would have to meet that condition. And the answer was, well, that could never be met. So then it shouldn't be a conditional use.
You know, it's an interesting problem. What Don was saying, I agree with 100%. It's a conditional use permit, and this particular, and again, this is a tough situation because I think residential transitional neighborhoods need to maintain the integrity of what they're supposed to look like. They're supposed to look like a residence even if there's a business in it. But from a conditional use side, this is a unique situation where there's a business owner that has a property that abuts his property in the residential transitional area, and he has a need for parking. It's not like you know, if someone came in there and said, I own a lot there, I wanna make it a standalone parking lot. I mean, that's not gonna be, I don't think that this commission would ever approve that. I don't care what it looks like. I mean, it's just a unique situation where there is a reason for granting a conditional use because there's an existing business that would benefit by having this if it was done under the proper, you know, conditions that we would put on it. So I'm not so sure, I mean, that's a question kind of from Mike, but I'm not so sure we're opening up a can of worms by just granting a conditional use permit in one specific particular case for an existing business that abuts the residential transition neighborhood. Is that, Mike, are we?
Well, you all have touched on it. You know, this is a broad parking lot provision across the city, if, you know, as presented. Obviously, the impetus is Mr. Motherall's property and his application to move this along. You know, I've heard valid points from both sides, and I think what's tough for y'all, what's tough for me to think through this is and what I would encourage you all to do is just think more. Start with broadly, do we need to look at this use citywide and within the zoning districts laid out by Drew? That's the first part of the analysis, and then to think through whether this is a use that should be allowed within an RT and the number of RT districts that we currently have. And then, after you get through that, then you decide on, you kind of in the back of your mind almost start thinking about this property. But this, you know, this obviously, this RT zone isn't unique. I mean, I think the other RT zones, as Bruce talks about, are similar. But that, you know, that you all, I didn't maybe specifically answer your question, but that's kind of the quagmire that we're involved in. I mean, there's been good discussions, and it's just kind of nice to see y'all, you know, kind of chew on this, and you have chewed on it. This is like the third or fourth meeting at least.
I guess my concern about the conditional use, whenever you look at it in the broad sense, is that just by nature and definition, the residential transitional is going to have a commercial zone bordering it in every instance. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the big picture, anybody in a commercial zone that felt like they needed more parking could buy the lot behind them in the residential transitional zone and create some more parking. By granting one conditional use, every time you grant that, you're setting precedent and making it tougher, I feel, to deny that application. And to me, that residential transitional zone is meant as a very specific purpose, and they're not very large areas when you look at each one independently. When we allow a standalone parking space the size of the lot, or potentially could be the size of the entire lot, you're chipping away at that buffer and making it smaller each time that is allowed. And so I just feel as a way to preserve that buffer, we need to limit that parking. Parking is provided under the definition like Rustin had talked about in the transitional zone, but in that instance it does not take away from the character and the use of that buffer. And I think that's what's important, is that we don't start eroding that buffer between our heavily commercial and our residential neighborhoods. Commissioners, any other thoughts?
Yep, I have.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, I've been on ZBA for 4 years. I've been on P&Z for 4 years in the past. And all the ones I've ever been to, all the hearings I've ever been to, I have never seen as many protests or concerns by neighboring citizens as there is here. And I think in respect for that, I don't have any choice about where I'm going.
That's a good point to make. I'm the same way. I've been on planning zoning for almost 6 years now, and I've never seen a response on a particular issue like that. And, you know, I didn't count letters, but I counted people, and there were over 20 people
Right.
that posted concerns about this. And so, Drew, am I correct in that our motion would be to accept the draft as written, or accept it as written with the RT zone being pulled out of the conditional use?
That's correct. You would have that option, or we can address them one at a time. That's entirely up to the commission. As drafted, it does include the RT as conditional, but again, the recommendation from staff is
There's
that
only
RT
there's three possibilities: permitted, conditional, or not allowed. So every zone should be,
Right.
to Bruce Strachey's
Yeah.
point. I mean,
Yeah,
every
Mr.
zone.
Strachey, thank you. The Guadalupe River and the Gateway District, after the workshop, the commission recommended that both of those be excluded. A standalone parking or a standalone parking structure not be allowed by those two districts.
Okay. All right.
So the recommendation is to take residential transitional out,
That's
out of conditional use.
out of the conditional
Out
use.
of
That's,
conditional use,
that's,
right.
that's an option. Another option is to leave it in.
Well, based on what, my thoughts are based on what we're talking about here. Like you say, every residential transitional neighborhood is butts commercial. And if we're not in this particular case, if we were not going to allow a parking lot in this particular case, I don't know any other case we'd allow a parking lot in a residential transitional area.
Yeah.
I would think.
I think, in Mr. Motherall's property in that neighborhood, not to muddy the waters, but that block itself, as Mr. Motherall pointed out, there is a number of properties, more than half of those properties are not residential properties, but they are within the RT district. It's possible that that block is in its own transition out of a neighborhood and into something slightly different. Not to be confused with the residential transitional purpose of being kind of a mixed use, lower impact, non-residential mixed in with residential. That district may be in its transition phase of its kind of lifespan of that block. But Mr. Strachey's point, some of the areas kind of south and east of downtown, Earl Garrett, Washington Street, some of that area is also zoned RT, and is not necessarily in a transition from one phase or one type of land use to another, similar to Clay Street.
An RT can have its zoning changed to accommodate
Correct.
something like
Yeah,
that, but
if-
to maintain the integrity of what's there and to abide by the rules that are set forth by planning and zoning,
Mhm.
I don't see that we have any other choice but to not deny it on that basis.
Right.
In addition, the question, the possibility exists for that property to have some type of a business put on it that gives a residential appearance to match the neighborhood
Mhm.
with parking behind it. Would there be anything in the zoning code that would not allow that parking to be shared with the parking on the other side?
Screening, is there a screening regulation?
The screening regulations do allow for some percentage of openings.
Okay.
That would just have to be studied in detail,
Okay.
specific to the property.
That's feasible.
And it's not the case here. The shopping center required parking spaces could not be in a different zoning district. But the shopping center as it sits today meets its parking requirement per the N21 district. So
But in this-
additional accessory parking or shared parking
On the other side.
on the other
Okay.
side with a primary use allowed in the RT district
Right,
would be
okay.
allowed. That's correct.
Okay.
I I would make a recommendation based on what we've got here that we approve the ordinance we have here, removing the RT from a conditional use permit. I mean, we're never going to, based on what we're talking about here, I don't think we're gonna see a residential transitional area where we're gonna allow standalone parking.
Right. Great.
All right.
You making that as a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve this proposal in front of us for this parking structures and parking lots with the recommendation of staff to remove RT from the permitted zoning areas.
Removing it as a conditional use?
Yes, removing it as a conditional use area.
One quick question before we vote.
Yes.
Okay, explain to me the parking structures and how that fits with this.
Yes, so the parking structure in the districts that were identified for permitted or conditional parking lot is recommended as a conditional use.
So it's the same. If you have a conditional standalone parking lot, you would have a conditional parking structure?
Except in C16 and E27, where we have parking lot as a permitted use, the parking structure is also a conditional use. So a parking structure, a parking garage, is a conditional use in any of those districts. Those first two sets. C16, East 27, and then that long list under conditional. The structure is conditional in all of those.
But removing RT.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion to accept the parking proposal in zoning code with the exception of removing RT from the conditional use. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 5-0. All right, thank you, commissioners. Thank you, everybody that spoke. Next item on the agenda is item 3B, public hearing and consideration and action on a zoning change for address 213, 215, 221 West Barnett Street. You want to give us some history on this, Drew?
Yes, sir. This property was previously known as the Famous Door Restaurant and Bar. The owner has been looking at opening up a new restaurant. They also own one of the properties next door. Get the site plan here. You can see they also own that house to the northwest of the Famous Door. They are asking for a planned district development, or planned development district, excuse me. Additional uses that would be allowed would be the bed and breakfast, business services 1 and 2, single-family dwelling, multifamily dwelling, single-family with an apartment, education, secondary and college, and primary. Funeral services, institution, public facilities, life care development, custom manufacturing, personal services 1 and limited, professional offices, restaurant, general, limited, and retail trade 1 and limited. This is for both buildings, but the Famous Door itself is proposed to be a new restaurant. Oh, excuse me, wrong direction there. This property is on 213, 215, and 221 West Barnett. And looking at kind of our comprehensive plan, current comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily address PD specifically, other than PDs are allowed. Looking at the Kerrville 2050 plan, looking through the place types that they're recommending rather than future land use, looking at the neighborhood residential and the residential transitional, different from our transitional residential district, but looking at those two districts, both of those include allowances for neighborhood commercial, being retail and offices, which is similar to what they're proposing here. Again, the restaurant and some kind of office or service use in the existing home next door. So this would be consistent. We haven't updated our zoning code to the Kerrville 2050 plan, but based on our place types recommended in the Kerrville 2050 plan, this would be consistent. And staff recommends it for your approval. I'd be pleased to answer any questions now or after the public hearing.
All right.
Drew, how did you come up with the actual land uses on this list? Was that something similar or
That was from the applicant.
from the applicant? Okay,
That was their recommended or requested list.
okay.
So in Plan Development District, you're allowed to do equipment sales, repair, storage, heavy equipment, fuel sales.
No, it doesn't have the P, so.
No,
Just
if
what-
it's
just the
blank,
Ps.
then it's not.
No, excuse me.
Not
No,
permitted.
those were not requested. Just
Okay,
the ones with
okay, just the ones with, okay.
the permitted, or P, the for
Okay,
permitted next
I
to them.
see, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, it's blank.
Yeah, so the equipment sales and the fuel
Mhm.
sales would not be allowed.
Right.
Any other questions before I open the public hearing? Okay, at 5:16, open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak, step forward. Please state your name and address. Seeing no one, okay. Yeah.
I represent the applicant,
Okay,
and so I'm glad to address any questions that y'all may have and give you a vision of what we're trying to bring forward.
okay. All right, we'll address that after the public hearing. Any other one, anybody else want to speak? Okay, 5:17, close the public hearing. Commissioners, any questions for Drew or for Mr. Strachey?
So Bruce, we're not sure what the adjacent structure is going to be used for?
The plan right now is to use that as a community center and have opportunities for learning and such with the kids in the neighborhood and such. But we don't know. We're developing this plan, and what we're really trying to accomplish here, and if you look at the uses that we're asking for, is one of the things that we feel is missing from not only this area but other areas, is that we've lost a lot of that social fabric that we have in our neighborhoods sometimes when we isolate all the residential stuff. This used to be a community center, a gathering place in the neighborhood, and we want to bring that back. You'll notice that we didn't ask to be permitted for a cocktail lounge or anything like that. We're trying to create an opportunity where people can gather. There can be a community center, there could be a church service, there might, be an event center and such, but it's a small setting on 3 full lots there on West Barnett at a historical site where this happened in the past, and we're trying to bring that back. And that's really the vision, and we recognize that the current owners, Johnny Borreo and his wife, they're here now. They own Rio Rancho out toward Ingram. They own the Longhorn up in Harper. They want to open another restaurant here and start to create, again, that fabric that is missing from so many of our neighborhoods. And we think this is the perfect place to start.
All right.
And we also have a lot of support from local neighborhoods. We've been working on this for months and talking to the neighbors. I think in the packet you'll find that there are a number of neighbors that have written letters in support, which we did solicit. And we think that it's something that the neighborhood is welcome to see, and we think that it's the perfect place to start bringing back that idea to our neighborhoods.
And Bruce, I apologize, that is not in there.
Oh, okay.
I did not get that in there.
There are 14 letters of
14
support.
I was thinking there's at least a dozen letters of support. They've been working with the neighborhood for probably 4 to 6 months.
More than that. Yes. Started in the fall.
Okay, working on getting neighborhood support and letting them know what's going on. They did have a number of letters of support that were submitted.
Okay. That's good.
Bruce, I was just curious on, one that jumped out at me was funeral services. I didn't know if that was how that one got there, or?
We've thought that if we can't do a restaurant, that we may have a church and have it be a real small, place like that. That's, Johnny, was there something specific about the funeral services that, because it's running from my head right now too.
So we're not really talking about a funeral home?
No, that's not our intention, but that
That would be allowed.
That would be allowed, and so,
If there was a place, if you needed more room than what the local church could provide, possibly.
and maybe that's not the right use, Rustin. We're trying to think of all the different things that would be part of a small community and could be useful there, so.
So would that allow for a funeral home, Mike, if we left that in?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't prohibit from having a ceremony.
Funeral
No, I think
service.
that
Service.
this is a funeral home, is what that is.
Right.
I don't want to limit anything if that was part of the, I just was curious.
I'm not sure it's certainly not the highest
Okay.
priority use that we have planned for the property.
All right. Any other questions or concerns? So what we're looking for as a motion would be to approve the planned development district as presented, or with any,
You used the
Changes.
phrase annexation of it. Is that the proper term? I saw that in there.
No,
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay.
No, approval of the zoning for the planned development district.
Okay.
okay. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve it as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 5-0. Items 4A and 4B have been withdrawn from the agenda. Item 5 is staff reports. Drew, what's up next?
The final reading or final hearing of the Comprehensive Plan 2050 will be with City Council next Tuesday, the 26th, at the Calhoun Theater at 6 p.m. I believe you all got an invite to that as members of the Planning Commission and the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. It's the only thing, for the most part, it's the only thing on the agenda. I mean, we're focusing that council meeting on the adoption. It's more or less a celebration of getting to the end of that 9-month process. As you guys are well aware, the community had a phenomenal input process. I've seen more community outreach and participation in this process than larger cities. And talking to our consultants, they've shared that as well. But that's the biggest thing we have coming forward. And we have implementation from there. We've got a long to-do list coming out of the Kerrville, the implementation plan. I believe it's 474 separate items for staff and different boards to be looking at over the next 30 years. So,
What's the schedule for the parking lot?
I'm sorry?
The parking lot?
Oh, items today will go to City Council on July 24th. Thank you. Both the parking lot code amendment and the PD zone change will go to council on July 24th.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted everyone here to be aware that, we are making a recommendation to City
Right.
Council.
That's right.
And that there's another chance to argue either side in front of City Council.
Yes, So go to city council for another public hearing and the first reading of the ordinance on July 24th. Second reading, if it doesn't get, tabled or anything like that, second reading would be scheduled for August 14th.
Okay.
So Tuesday.
All right, any other business? If not, at 5:25, we'll close this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission.